Joseph stood in the small clearing just past the endless chasm. In frustration, he kicked at the low scrub sitting closer to the canyon wall. He'd been over the path what felt like hundreds of times, and still there was nothing. No sign that Daphne had been there, but he somehow knew she'd been there. With a growl, he aimed his boot at another clump of foliage. Only this time he hit something that rang with a dull clunk. Curious, he bent down to retrieve the item he'd hit, realizing it was a dagger. With a sharp intake of breath, he pulled back. A drop of blood spilled from his finger where the sharp blade had pierced the skin. He sucked on the wounded appendage as he bent to retrieve the knife, hefting it in one hand.
This was Daphne's,
he told the air. How many times had he seen her playing with this blade, or another like it? She'd made them under her uncle's tutelage. There was no mistaking it. The dark metal seemed to burn in his hand, though not unpleasantly. He gripped the handle more tightly, then pocketed it. Something had definitely happened to his fiancée in this pass. He was on the right track. If only he knew which way to go from there. Making a quick decision, he headed back down the path towards the village. The ruined city held nothing for him, but other places might. Margo welcomed Walter back to the camp with fried eggs and sausages. She tried not to look at the conspicuous pile of boxes and metal cases he and Courtney had brought up from the beach. Sometimes it was better not to know, she decided.
"Where's Tyler?"
she asked as she sipped a cup of coffee. Walter glanced up from his plate of food and looked around. At least an hour had passed since the two had returned from the mainland. But knowing Tyler, he was probably off mulling over events.
"Don't worry,"
he assured.
"He'll come back when he's hungry. Chances are good he's just dozed off somewhere."
Raising an eyebrow, Margo decided not to comment. Courtney had already reported that the dragon hadn't quite acted his usual self on the beach. She couldn't help but wonder why. With an inward sigh, she let the matter drop. It was better to not meddle in the affairs of dragons. Not that she feared he would eat her, but she would rather not risk the wrath of an almost deity, even if he was relatively level-headed. Courtney watched the exchange between the two adults, not sure what was going on. After having helped carry several loads worth of weaponry and who knew what else, she was glad for the rest. But now that she thought about it, Tyler had looked a bit odd. It was almost as though his skin had partially scaled over, like he couldn't decide which form to take, mortal or dragon. Margo set down her cup and stood from her stump.
"You're probably right,"
she said as she brushed off her pants.
"In that case, make sure you leave something for him to eat when he returns."
Turning to Courtney, she picked up the canteen by her side.
"Time to get back to work."
I was afraid you'd say that,
Courtney said with a sigh. By the time Tyler reached Anwen's little grove, she had fallen asleep. He stood several yards away, contemplating her prone form. She looked exhausted, and no wonder, he thought. Cautiously, he moved closer, bending down to touch her forehead. The contact didn't so much as disturb her slumber.
"What a pair we make,"
he mused as he sat down next to her, legs crossed underneath him.
"I wish things were different. If only we could go back in time. Before the Mage War, things would be different. But times are changing. I'm sure even normal mortals can feel it."
Lying down, he faced the sky, shading his eyes from the light filtering down through the trees with one hand.
"I'm afraid of what the mages are planning,"
he admitted.
"There are far more of them than there are of us. But I'm even more afraid of losing you. Either way, we don't have much time. Damned if we do, damned if we don't. Wake the other dragons or die trying. Don't wake them and all dragonkind ends. Maybe even the mages. Not that they'd listen to that."
He sighed heavily. Weariness caught up with the dragon and he closed his eyes.
"Oh, I'm tired, Anwen,"
he confessed.
"I'm tired of hiding. Tired of being alone. So tired."
Without thinking, he moved his hand towards hers. As sleep overtook him, his fingers laced with hers. It created a similitude of the bond their souls now shared. Madame Millard paced in front of her tent. Only the rising majesty of the mountain by Tarragon overshadowed her. Things were going much more slowly than she'd anticipated. Another group of fallen had been dispatched to find the keeper, but without any results. This time she'd sent a few mages along, but even they had returned with empty hands. It was almost as if the group she sought had disappeared, but that was impossible. Even if they were dead, the fallen would be able to find them. The mage grabbed the first person to cross her path and raked her long nails down his arm. Blood trickled from the deep scratches as she pushed him away.
"Why?
She demanded.
Why can you not find one stupid little girl?"
They were all useless, she decided. There was only one person she trusted to get the job done. Why she hadn't thought about contacting her before was anyone's guess, but now that her need was dire, she had to make a decision.
Find me Kira!
Madame Millard yelled with an icy voice, her arms thrown wide to show her frustration. Several mages ran to obey her command, knowing the tone she used meant someone might die before the end of the day, unless her whims were fulfilled. Courtney wiped sweat from her brow. Today's lesson had definitely been more complicated. She wasn't sure if that was a good or bad thing, though. It would be easy to assume that since she was being given harder challenges, she was improving, but it was also possible that Margo was just pushing her because they were running out of time. And she was so sore. She leaned against a nearby tree stump. What with all the intense training and helping Walter haul his goodies to camp, she was exhausted. The break was more than warranted. Part of her wondered if they'd have a chance to eat some lunch before continuing. If nothing else, she wanted the chance to catch her breath. Margo walked a circle around Courtney's resting place, contemplating her student.
In battle, the enemy won't care if you're tired.
She lectured.
They won't care if you're hungry, dying, or even dead. And if you don't want to give it your all, you will be dead.
Courtney tried to control her breathing as the sweat ran down her face. The sun was quite warm, despite the overshadowing trees surrounding the clearing.
I thought you wanted me to conserve my energy and use it constructively.
Pausing in front of the teen, Margo nodded.
In an ideal world, that's how it should be. But both you and I know those of the Mage Circle fight dirty. And there will be more than unfair odds against us. We won't have the luxury of taking our time. That's why you must treat each attack as if it were your last. Because that's what it might become if you don't.
The blonde-haired girl nodded as the concept clicked.
I still don't like it,
she said under her breath, but she understood the reasoning behind it. Madame Millard had a reputation of being ruthless, as well as many who followed her. They feared the Master Mage's retribution more than they feared for their own lives. Margo smiled. Dirt smudged across her face from their previous exertions.
You don't have to like it. But you do have to deal with it.
She moved a few paces away, picking up a convenient stick as she moved. The branch expanded into a spear without so much as a spoken word from her lips. With lightning-quick speed, she turned on her young companion. Courtney somehow managed to evade the older woman's attack by falling on her rump. Backpedaling, she managed to use another tree to stand. She then transformed a piece of dead wood into a weapon. Her efforts produced a blade that was nowhere near as long or as elegant as Margo's spear, but it was functional, and that's what mattered. The Cicada didn't give her much room to maneuver, coming in fast and hard. Using the long shaft of her weapon as a pole, she vaulted over Courtney, only to quickly pivot around. With her free hand, she thrust forward, sending a wave of energy towards the girl. Not expecting this line of attack, Courtney was hit full-on by the wall of wind. The energy knocked her back to the ground, sending her skidding several dozen yards. She lay stunned from the unexpected force and felt Margo's spear pierce her shoulder as a result. Adrenaline sang through her as she grabbed the nearest item at hand and threw it. Hot cinders peppered Margo's body as she rolled to one side.
That's more like it,
she panted as she regained her footing. Brushing a few sparks out of her hair, she edged more carefully forward as Courtney got back on her feet.
Now, let's see how far you can go.
With that, she lunged forward once more.